The flames licked at the wooden beams of Grace Atwood's cabin as she desperately tried to reach the door. But the collapsing rafter had pinned her skirt to the floor, trapping her in the inferno that was once her home. The smoke burned her lungs and tears streamed down her ash-covered face as she realized with growing horror that she might not escape this alive. Nebraska Territory. 1867, Grace had come west 6 months ago, following the death of her parents in Philadelphia. At 22, she had inherited enough money to start fresh, away from the memories and the pitying glances of family friends. The small plot of land just outside the growing settlement of Rivercross had seemed perfect affordable, with fertile soil and a sturdy, if modest, cabin already built. She had been determined to make a life for herself, planting a garden and keeping chickens, selling eggs and vegetables in town when she could. The locals had been curious about the refined Eastern woman living alone, but most had been kind enough, especially the shopkeeper's wife who'd shown her how to preserve vegetables for the coming winter. Now, as the fire roared around her, Grace thought bitterly of how short her new life would be. It had started in the kitchen, a spark from the stove catching on the curtains while she'd been outside collecting eggs. By the time she'd smelled the smoke and rushed back in to save what few possessions she had, the fire had spread too quickly, and now she was trapped. Help! She screamed, though she knew it was futile. Her nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Please, somebody help me. The smoke was getting thicker. Grace tore frantically at her skirt, but the heavy wooden beam wouldn't budge. Her vision was beginning to blur, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. And then, through the crackling flames and falling debris, she heard the thundering of hooves approaching. Nathan Wyatt had been on his way back to his ranch after delivering a small herd to the cattle yard in Rivercross, when he saw the column of smoke rising in the distance. At 26, he'd been working with cattle since he was barely tall enough to mount a horse, and he'd seen enough prairie fires to know trouble when he spotted it. He'd urged his horse forward, hoping it wasn't what he feared. As he crested the hill and saw the cabin engulfed in flames, his heart sank. It was the newcomer's place, the Eastern woman who kept to herself but nodded politely when they crossed paths in town. Whoa! He called to his horse, dismounting quickly and tying the reins to a fence post a safe distance from the blaze. He approached cautiously, the heat intense even from yards away. That's when he heard a woman scream from inside the burning structure. Without hesitation, Nathan pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth and rushed toward the cabin. The front door was partially blocked by a fallen beam, but he managed to squeeze through, immediately assaulted by the thick smoke and scorching heat. "Where are you?" he shouted, his voice muffled by the bandana. "Here," came a weak response from the back of the cabin. "I'm trapped." Nathan ducked low beneath the worst of the smoke and made his way toward the voice. Through the haze, he spotted her, a woman pinned to the floor by a fallen support beam. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide with terror and fading hope. "Hold on," he called, dropping to his knees beside her. The beam was heavy, but adrenaline surged through him as he braced himself and lifted with all his might. "Pull yourself free, quickly." Grace felt the pressure on her skirt ease slightly. She yanked the fabric with all her remaining strength and managed to tear it free, though the effort left her gasping in the smoke-filled air. "I can't breathe," she choked out. Nathan didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he turned toward the door. The flames were spreading rapidly now, licking at the walls and ceiling. A beam crashed down just feet from them, sending sparks flying. "Keep your face against me," he ordered, and Grace buried her face in his shirt as he navigated through the burning cabin. The heat was unbearable, scorching his exposed skin, singeing his hair, but he pressed forward, determined. With a final surge of strength, Nathan burst through the doorway and into the open air. He didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the cabin, finally setting Grace down gently on the grass. She coughed violently, gulping in the fresh air as he collapsed beside her, his own lungs burning from the smoke. Together they watched as the cabin's roof gave way with a thunderous crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the evening sky. "You saved my life," Grace whispered, her voice raw. "I don't even know your name." "Nathan Wyatt," he replied between coughs. "Most folks just call me Nate." "Grace Atwood," she said, extending a trembling hand. "I'm eternally in your debt, Mr. Wyatt." As their hands met, neither could have imagined how their lives would intertwine in the coming months, or that from these ashes something remarkable would grow. After the fire had consumed what remained of Grace's cabin, Nathan insisted on taking her to his ranch. It wasn't proper, he knew, for an unmarried woman to stay with a bachelor, but these were exceptional circumstances. Besides, his housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, would be there to serve as chaperone and ensure propriety was maintained. "I can't impose," Grace protested weakly as he helped her onto his horse. "You nearly died today, Miss Atwood. You need rest and care," Nathan said firmly, mounting behind her. He could feel her trembling against him, whether from shock or the cooling evening air, he couldn't tell. "My ranch is the closest place. We'll get you settled, and tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Grace nodded, too exhausted to argue further. She leaned back against his solid chest, grateful for his warmth and strength as they rode through the gathering darkness. Nathan's ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. Lights glowed in the windows as they approached, and a plump older woman appeared in the doorway as Nathan helped Grace dismount. "Good heavens, Mrs. Holloway exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "What's happened?" "Fire at Miss Atwood's cabin," Nathan explained quickly. "She needs care, Mrs. Holloway. I'll see to the horse." The housekeeper wrapped a protective arm around Grace's shoulders and led her inside, clucking sympathetically at her soot-stained clothes and reddened eyes. "You poor dear. Let's get you cleaned up and into some fresh clothes. I think I have something that might fit you, though it'll be a bit large." Grace allowed herself to be guided to a small bedroom at the back of the house. Mrs. Holloway helped her wash the soot from her face and hands and provided a simple cotton nightgown and robe. "Mr. Wyatt saved my life," Grace said quietly as the older woman helped her into bed. "He ran into the flames without a moment's hesitation." Mrs. Holloway smiled. "That sounds like our Nate. Never thinks of himself when someone's in trouble." She tucked the blankets around Grace. "Now rest, dear. Everything else can wait until morning." Left alone, Grace stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, the events of the day replaying in her mind. She had lost everything: her home, her few possessions, the mementos of her parents she'd brought west. But she was alive, thanks to the bravery of a man she barely knew. As exhaustion finally overtook her, her last thought was of Nathan's strong arms carrying her through the flames. Nathan tended to his horse before entering the house, using the time to collect his thoughts. He'd seen tragedy before; it was part of life on the frontier, but something about Grace Atwood's situation stirred him deeply. Perhaps it was the way she tried to be brave even when trapped and terrified, or perhaps it was simply that she was alone out here, without family to rely on. When he finally entered the kitchen, Mrs. Holloway was waiting with hot coffee and a plate of food. "She's sleeping," the housekeeper informed him, noting the concern on his face. "Poor thing's exhausted, but other than some minor burns and smoke in her lungs, she seems all right." Nathan nodded, sitting heavily in a chair. She's lucky. Another few minutes and… He didn't finish the thought. Your hands need tending, Mrs. Holloway observed, noticing the reddened skin and blisters forming. And there's a burn on your cheek as well. He submitted to her ministrations, wincing as she cleaned and bandaged his burns. What will she do now, Mrs. Holloway? She's lost everything, the older woman sighed. That's for her to decide, I suppose, but she'll need help wherever she goes next. She'll stay here until she's recovered, Nathan said firmly. After that, we'll help her rebuild if that's what she wants. Mrs. Holloway gave him a long, thoughtful look. Very generous of you, Mr. Wyatt. Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. It's what anyone would do. No, she replied softly. It isn't. The next morning, Grace woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was and why. Then the memories flooded back: the fire, the choking smoke, and the cowboy who'd carried her to safety. She sat up slowly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles and the raw feeling in her throat. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Holloway entered carrying a tray. Good morning, dear. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle, Grace admitted with a weak smile. But alive, thanks to Mr. Wyatt. The housekeeper set the tray on her lap: tea, toast, and scrambled eggs. He's asking after you. Would you feel up to seeing him after you've eaten and dressed? I found some clothes that might suit you, my daughter's from when she visited last summer. She's closer to your size than I am. Grace nodded gratefully. I'd like to thank him properly, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do now. After eating and dressing in the borrowed clothes, a simple blue calico dress that was a bit short at the ankles but otherwise fit well enough, Grace made her way to the main room of the house. Nathan was just coming in from outside, his sleeves rolled up and a smudge of dirt on his tanned face. He stopped short when he saw her. Miss Atwood, you're up, Mr. Wyatt, she said, suddenly feeling awkward. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. You risked your life for a stranger. Nathan removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. No need for thanks. I'm just glad I was passing by when I was. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. You should be resting. Grace sat, noting the bandages on his hands. You were injured. He shrugged dismissively. Just some minor burns, they'll heal. Because of me, she said softly. Because I chose to help, he corrected gently, which I'd do again in a heartbeat. There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Grace spoke. I've lost everything, Mr. Wyatt. My home, my possessions. I don't even have proper clothes of my own anymore. Nathan leaned forward. You have your life, Miss Atwood, and you're not without friends here. Mrs. Holloway and I will help you get back on your feet. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, he interrupted. You'll stay here until you're fully recovered. Then, if you wish to rebuild, I have men who can help with that. If you'd rather return east, I'll see that you have funds for the journey. Grace was taken aback by his generosity. Why would you do all this for someone you barely know? Nathan's expression softened. Out here, we look after one another. It's how we survive. He hesitated, then added, Besides, I admire your courage. Coming west alone, starting a new life that takes real grit. I'd hate to see one setback, even one as serious as this, send you running back east. Grace felt a flutter in her chest at his words. No one had ever described her as courageous before. In Philadelphia, she'd been considered eccentric at best, foolhardy at worst, for her decision to head west after her parents' deaths. I don't want to go back, she admitted. There's nothing for me there, but starting over again seems overwhelming right now. Nathan nodded, understanding. Take it one day at a time. For now, just focus on regaining your strength. Over the next week, Grace did exactly that. Each day she felt a little stronger, venturing outside to sit on the porch and breathe the clean, pine-scented air. Mrs. Holloway fussed over her, insisting she eat well to regain her strength, while Nathan checked on her daily, often bringing small gifts, a book from his modest library, wildflowers from the meadow, or once, a kitten from a new litter in the barn that he thought might cheer her. Grace found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about Nathan Wyatt that drew her: his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But she reminded herself that her situation was precarious. She was dependent on his charity, at least for now, and couldn't afford to develop feelings that might complicate matters. Nathan, for his part, found reasons to be around the house more than usual, much to Mrs. Holloway's knowing amusement. He'd never been one for lengthy conversations, but he found himself wanting to hear Grace's thoughts on everything from books to the best way to grow tomatoes. Her Eastern refinement was evident in her speech and manners, but there was a resilience to her that he hadn't expected. She wasn't afraid of hard work or rough conditions. She'd proven that by coming west in the first place. One evening, about 10 days after the fire, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Grace had finally broached the subject of her future. "I've been thinking," she said, her hands folded in her lap. "I'd like to rebuild, but not in the same location. The memories would be too difficult." Nathan nodded. "That's understandable. Did you have somewhere in mind?" Grace hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering about the small parcel of land to the south of your property, the one with the creek running through it. I noticed it doesn't appear to be claimed or developed." "Simmons' old place," Nathan said, surprised. "He gave up and headed back east 2 years ago. The land's available, but it's rough, overgrown, and the old cabin's barely standing. But the location is good," Grace persisted. "Rich soil, water, and—" She paused, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Not too far from neighbors I've come to value." Nathan felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "If that's where you want to be, I'll help you claim it, and my men and I will build you a proper cabin before winter sets in." "I can pay," Grace said quickly. "I still have funds from my parents' estate." "Not a fortune, but enough to cover materials and fair wages." "We can discuss that later," Nathan said, reluctant to talk business when the evening was so pleasant. "For now, I'm just glad you're staying." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of growing feelings that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The moment was broken by Mrs. Holloway calling them in for supper, but that evening marked a turning point. Grace now had a plan, a direction forward, and Nathan had the reassurance that she wouldn't be leaving his life anytime soon. The following days saw a flurry of activity. Nathan rode into Rivercross to arrange the land claim for Grace, while she and Mrs. Holloway made lists of supplies needed for the new cabin. Word of the fire and Grace's circumstances had spread, and several of the town's women organized a cabin-raising gathering, where they would bring household items to help her start over. Nathan returned from town with news that surprised Grace. "The land claim's been filed in your name," he told her as they walked together near the corral. "But there's something else. Several people in town are organizing to help build your cabin. It seems you've made more friends than you realized." Grace was touched by the community's generosity. "I've barely interacted with most of them. They remember how you tended Mrs. Peterson's children when they had the fever last month," Nathan reminded her. "And how you shared your garden's bounty with the widow Jones. Kindness doesn't go unnoticed out here." "Neither does bravery," Grace said softly, glancing at his hands where the burns were healing. The shopkeeper's wife couldn't stop talking about how you rushed into a burning building to save me. Nathan looked embarrassed. People make too much of that. No, Grace said firmly, stopping to face him. They don't. What you did was extraordinary, Nathan. I would have died if not for you. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both noticed. A charged silence fell between them, broken only by the distant nickering of horses and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't have lived with myself if I hadn't tried, Nathan finally said, his voice low and earnest. The thought of you trapped in there. Something in his tone made Grace's heart beat faster. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand, careful of the healing burns. Thank you, she whispered. Not just for saving me, but for everything since. Your kindness has meant more than I can express. Nathan looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. For a breathless moment, Grace thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently squeezed her fingers. We should head back, he said softly. Mrs. Holloway will be looking for us. Grace nodded, trying to hide her disappointment as they walked back to the house. She was becoming increasingly aware that her feelings for Nathan were deepening into something more than gratitude or friendship. But she couldn't be sure if he felt the same, and the last thing she wanted was to make her situation awkward when he'd been so generous. What she didn't know was that Nathan was fighting a similar battle. As they walked side by side, he was acutely aware of her presence, the subtle floral scent that somehow lingered despite her having lost all her personal items in the fire, the graceful way she moved, the quiet strength she'd shown in the face of devastating loss. He was falling for Grace Atwood, but his sense of honor held him back. She was dependent on his help right now. It wouldn't be right to complicate things with romantic feelings she might feel obligated to return. 2 days later, work began on Grace's new cabin. True to Nathan's word, several men from neighboring ranches and the town of Rivercross arrived early in the morning, tools in hand and wagons loaded with lumber and supplies. Nathan had already staked out the foundation on the plot of land Grace had chosen, and the men set to work with practiced efficiency. Grace, Mrs. Holloway, and several women from town set up tables under the trees, preparing food for the workers and organizing the household items that had been donated. Grace was overwhelmed by the generosity: linens, cookware, preserved foods, even some clothing and personal items to replace what she'd lost. People are so kind, she said to Elizabeth Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, as they arranged dishes on a makeshift shelf. That's how it works out here, Elizabeth replied with a smile. We all need each other. Besides, she added with a knowing glance toward where Nathan was directing the construction, I think there might be a special reason Mr. Wyatt's putting so much effort into making sure you're settled properly. Grace felt her cheeks warm. He's been very generous to everyone. That's just his nature. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Well, whatever his motivation, you're getting a fine cabin out of it. The men should have the frame up by tonight and the roof on within a few days. The work continued at an impressive pace. By sundown, as Elizabeth had predicted, the frame of the cabin stood outlined against the darkening sky, a simple rectangle with spaces marked for windows and a door. It wasn't large, but it would be sturdy and comfortable, with enough room for Grace to live comfortably. As the workers departed for the night, promising to return the following day, Nathan walked Grace back to his ranch where she would continue to stay until the cabin was habitable. What do you think? He asked, gesturing back toward the construction site. Will it suit you? It's perfect, Grace assured him. I can't believe how quickly it's coming together. Men work faster when there's a pretty lady to impress, Nathan said with a smile, then immediately looked embarrassed as if he hadn't meant to voice that thought aloud. Grace felt that flutter in her chest again. Is that why you're working so hard, Mr. Wyatt? To impress me? In the fading light, she saw color rise in his face. I just want you to be comfortable and safe, Miss Atwood. Grace, she corrected gently. After all we've been through, I think you can call me Grace. Grace, he repeated, the name sounding like a caress on his lips. Then you must call me Nathan. They walked in companionable silence the rest of the way, both aware of the growing connection between them but uncertain how to address it. The cabin raising continued over the next week, with the structure taking shape more each day. The walls went up, the roof was shingled, windows and a door were installed, and a simple stone fireplace and chimney were constructed. Inside, shelves and cupboards were built, and a sleeping loft was added to maximize the space. Grace divided her time between helping at the construction site and accompanying Mrs. Holloway into town to purchase necessities she would need for her new home. The older woman had become almost motherly toward her, offering advice on everything from how to keep a cabin warm in winter to which local merchants offered the fairest prices. You'll need to think about getting some livestock, Mrs. Holloway said as they rode back from town one afternoon, the wagon loaded with supplies. At least a few chickens for eggs, maybe a milk cow if you can manage it. Grace nodded. I had chickens before, but never a cow. I'm not sure I know how to care for one properly. Nathan could teach you, Mrs. Holloway suggested, a little too innocently. He has a way with animals, and he mentioned that one of his heifers will be calving soon. He might be persuaded to let you have the calf to raise. Grace smiled, seeing through the matchmaking attempt. Mrs. Holloway, are you trying to ensure that Nathan has reason to visit my cabin regularly? The older woman chuckled. Is it that obvious, dear? I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He's a good man, hardworking, honest, kind. But he's been alone too long, focused on building his ranch. We've known each other barely 2 weeks, Grace pointed out. Sometimes that's all it takes, Mrs. Holloway replied sagely. My late husband proposed after knowing me 10 days. We had 42 good years together before he passed. Grace didn't respond, but the conversation stayed with her. Was it possible to know so quickly that someone was right for you? She'd had suitors in Philadelphia, but none had stirred her heart the way Nathan did with just a glance. That evening, as they all sat on Nathan's porch after supper, Mrs. Holloway announced that she needed to visit her daughter in the next county. Her time is coming soon with the baby, and she's asked for my help, she explained. I'll be gone at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Nathan frowned. You've never been away that long before. Who will look after things here? I've arranged for Sally Jensen to come by 3 times a week to do the heavy cleaning and laundry, Mrs. Holloway said. As for cooking, well, I thought perhaps Miss Atwood might be willing to help with that, at least until her cabin is ready. She's shown quite a talent in the kitchen these past days. Grace realized she was being manipulated but couldn't find it in herself to mind. I'd be happy to help, of course. It's the least I can do after all your hospitality. Nathan looked uncertain. People might talk with Mrs. Holloway gone and you still staying here. Then I'll move into my cabin as soon as it's minimally habitable, Grace decided. The walls and roof are sound and the fireplace works. I don't need everything to be perfect. Excellent solution, Mrs. Holloway approved, rising from her chair. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to pack for my journey. I'll be leaving first thing in the morning. After she'd gone inside, Nathan turned to Grace with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. I think she's playing matchmaker. Grace laughed softly. I came to the same conclusion earlier today. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Grace felt that now familiar warmth spread through her. Would that be so terrible? Nathan asked quietly. If she succeeded, I mean. Grace's breath caught. No, she whispered. Not terrible at all. Nathan moved his chair closer to hers, their shoulders nearly touching. I've been wanting to talk to you, Grace, about what might be growing between us. I've felt it too, she admitted. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I don't want you to feel obligated in any way because of the help I've given you. That was freely offered, with no expectations. I know that, Grace assured him. What I feel has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the man you are, Nathan. He smiled then, the tension easing from his shoulders. When I saw you in that burning cabin, something happened to me. I didn't just want to save a person in danger, I needed to save you specifically, even though we'd barely spoken before. Perhaps some things are meant to be, Grace suggested softly. Nathan's gaze dropped to her lips, and this time, he didn't hold back. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Grace closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief but electric, sending a shiver down Grace's spine. When they parted, Nathan's eyes were dark with emotion. I've been wanting to do that for days, he confessed. I've been hoping you would, she replied with a shy smile. They sat together in the darkness for another hour, talking softly about their lives, their hopes, the growing feelings between them. By the time they reluctantly said goodnight, something had shifted. What had been an unspoken attraction was now acknowledged, a tender new beginning that both excited and frightened them with its intensity. The next morning, Mrs. Holloway departed as planned, but not before giving Grace a knowing wink that made her blush to the roots of her hair. Nathan rode out to check on his cattle, leaving Grace to handle the household chores and prepare a midday meal for when he returned. She found herself humming as she worked, her heart lighter than it had been in months, perhaps years. Last night's kiss had changed everything, opening a door to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. When Nathan returned for the midday meal, there was a new awareness between them, shy glances, fingers brushing as dishes were passed, conversations that seemed to have deeper meanings beneath the ordinary words. I checked on your cabin on my way back, Nathan told her as they ate. The men are putting in the floor today. It should be habitable by tomorrow, though basic. Grace nodded, torn between excitement at having her own space again and reluctance to leave Nathan's home, where they'd grown so close. I appreciate everything you and the others have done. Will you be comfortable there alone? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I lived alone before, she reminded him, and I worried about you then too, he admitted, even before the fire. The simple confession touched her deeply. You did. Nathan nodded, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. I used to find reasons to ride past your place just to make sure everything looked all right. I told myself I was being neighborly, but, Grace prompted when he trailed off. But I think even then I was drawn to you, he finished quietly. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it. Grace reached across the table and took his hand. I'm glad the fire didn't happen before you admitted that to yourself. Nathan's expression darkened. Don't even joke about that, Grace. The thought of losing you before I even had a chance to know you. She squeezed his hand. I'm sorry. You're right. But I'm here, Nathan, safe because of you. That evening they moved some of Grace's accumulated belongings to the new cabin, which was indeed nearly complete. The floor was in, the windows glazed, the fireplace drawing properly. It was sparsely furnished, but neighbors had donated a bed, table, chairs, and various household necessities. It would be comfortable enough if lonely after her time at Nathan's ranch. As if reading her thoughts, Nathan said, I'll come by tomorrow to make sure everything's working as it should, and I'd like to keep checking on you if that's all right. Grace smiled up at him. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Before they left for the night, Nathan surprised her with one more gift, a small, sturdy rocking chair he'd made himself, working on it in secret during the evenings. "Every home needs a rocker," he said as he placed it near the fireplace, "for quiet evenings or someday for rocking babies to sleep." The implication behind his words made Grace's heart race. "It's beautiful, Nathan. Thank you." They stood in the center of her new home, surrounded by the evidence of community generosity and Nathan's special care. When he pulled her into his arms for a lingering kiss goodnight, Grace felt as if she'd finally found where she belonged. True to his word, Nathan visited the next day after Grace had moved into her cabin. He brought with him a gift that made her laugh with delight, a fluffy gray kitten from the barn litter. "For company," he explained as the tiny creature explored its new surroundings, "and to keep mice away from your provisions." "She's perfect," Grace declared, scooping up the kitten and nuzzling its soft fur. "I'll call her Smokey to remind me of how we met." Nathan stayed for supper, and they fell into an easy pattern over the following weeks. He would visit every day, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from his hives, wildflowers from the meadow, a book he thought she might enjoy. Often he stayed to help with chores around her property, building a chicken coop, repairing a loose board on the porch, teaching her how to chop wood properly. Grace, for her part, always welcomed him with a warm smile and usually a freshly baked treat or a hearty meal. They would talk for hours, learning each other's histories, sharing hopes and fears, discovering the many ways their hearts aligned despite their different backgrounds. The people of Rivercross noticed the blossoming relationship, of course. It was the subject of good-natured gossip at the general store and knowing glances when the couple attended church together on Sundays. Most approved Nathan Wyatt was well respected in the community, and Grace had proven herself to be hardworking and kind. A few raised eyebrows at the speed with which the relationship was developing, but near-death experiences had a way of accelerating matters of the heart. Mrs. Holloway returned from her daughters after 3 weeks, immediately noticing the change between Nathan and Grace. She said nothing directly but smiled to herself when Nathan announced he would be checking on Miss Atwood's chimney for the 3rd time that week. As summer gave way to autumn, Grace's little homestead flourished. Her garden, though planted late, yielded enough vegetables to see her through the coming winter, with Nathan's help in preserving them. The chickens Nathan had given her were laying well, and a young heifer, a gift from his herd, grazed contentedly in the small pasture behind her cabin. One crisp October evening, as they sat together on her porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues, Nathan took her hand. "Grace," he began, his voice unusually serious, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Mine too. I've been thinking," he continued, "about the future. Winter will be here soon, and I worry about you out here alone when the snow comes." Grace raised her head to look at him. "I'll be fine, Nathan. The cabin is sturdy and I have plenty of provisions." "That's not," he started, then took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say rather poorly is that I don't want you to face another night alone, winter or otherwise." He shifted to face her directly. "I love you, Grace Atwood. I think I began falling for you the moment I carried you from that fire, and every day since has only deepened those feelings." Grace's heart soared at his words. "I love you too, Nathan, more than I ever thought possible." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band with a single pearl set into it. "This was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together to build a new life." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Grace Atwood, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, face whatever comes together, grow old by my side? Tears of joy filled Grace's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, with all my heart. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and devotion. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Rivercross, with what seemed like the entire community in attendance. Grace wore a new dress of pale blue silk that the women of the town had helped her make, and Nathan looked handsome in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving his bride. After the ceremony, the celebration continued at Nathan's ranch, now their ranch, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. As evening fell, lanterns were lit and the dancing continued under the stars, with Nathan and Grace at the center, lost in their own world of newfound joy. Mrs. Holloway, watching from the sidelines with a contented smile, turned to Elizabeth Peterson. "I've never seen him so happy," she remarked. "She's brought light back into his life." "And he's given her roots and a sense of belonging," Elizabeth replied. "It's a perfect match, forged in fire, quite literally." As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Nathan and Grace stood together on the porch of what was now their home, accepting congratulations and well wishes. When the last wagon had disappeared down the lane, Nathan swept his new wife into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wyatt," he said softly. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart full to bursting. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness when I came west," she admitted. "Especially not after the fire. I thought I'd lost everything." "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what truly matters," Nathan replied, carrying her across the threshold into their home and their future together. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of shared joys and challenges. They decided to make Nathan's ranch their primary home, but kept Grace's cabin as well, using it as a place to store harvested crops and occasionally as a quiet retreat when they wanted to be alone, away from the busy life of the ranch. Grace adapted quickly to being a rancher's wife, learning to ride expertly under Nathan's tutelage, helping with cattle drives, and keeping the books for their growing operation. Nathan, in turn, nurtured her garden with the same care he showed his livestock, building a larger plot near their home and constructing an irrigation system that made it the envy of neighboring farms. Their love deepened with each passing day, moving beyond the initial rush of passion into something more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support. They had their disagreements, of course, but never went to bed angry, believing that each day was too precious to waste on discord. As their first anniversary approached, Grace had a special surprise to share with Nathan. She'd suspected for several weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling him. The opportunity came on a warm summer evening as they sat together on the porch swing he'd built for her birthday. Nathan had his arm around her shoulders, and Grace was nestled against his side, a position that had become second nature to them both. "You remember what you said when you gave me that rocking chair?" she asked softly. Nathan smiled. "That every home needs a rocker. For quiet evenings or for rocking babies to sleep." Grace took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Well, it seems that rocker will be getting a lot of use come winter." Nathan's eyes widened, his hand trembling slightly against her still flat abdomen. "Are you saying?" "We're going to have a baby," Grace confirmed, her eyes shining with joy. "Dr. Pearson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Nathan's expression transformed from shock to wonder to pure elation in the span of seconds. He gathered Grace in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain, and kissed her with all the love in his heart. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "Our baby. Grace nodded, her own tears of happiness mingling with his. A new life, Nathan. Born from the love that began when you carried me from those flames. The news of their coming child spread quickly through the community, bringing a fresh wave of well wishes and gifts. The women organized a baby shower for Grace, presenting her with handmade blankets, tiny clothes, and practical advice for the challenges of motherhood. The men, not to be outdone, helped Nathan build an addition to their home, a nursery connected to the main bedroom, with a large window to catch the morning sun. As Grace's body changed with the growing life inside her, Nathan became even more protective, sometimes to the point of fussing that made her laugh. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she would remind him when he tried to prevent her from doing her normal chores. "You're carrying our child," he would counter, "the most precious cargo imaginable." They compromised, with Grace continuing her less strenuous activities and Nathan taking on more of the household tasks. In the evenings, they would sit together in front of the fire, his hand resting on her growing belly, feeling the baby's movements and making plans for the future. "If it's a girl," Grace said one night as they lay in bed, Nathan's arms cradling her from behind, "I'd like to name her Elizabeth after my mother." "Elizabeth Wyatt," Nathan tested the name. "It's beautiful, and if it's a boy," Grace turned in his arms to face him. "I was thinking Michael, after your father. Michael Nathan Wyatt." Nathan's eyes softened at the mention of his late father who had passed away years before he met Grace. "He would have loved you," he said softly, "almost as much as I do." The baby arrived on a snowy January night, after a long and difficult labor that left Nathan pacing anxiously outside their bedroom while the doctor and Mrs. Holloway attended to Grace. Her cries of pain tore at his heart, making him feel helpless in a way he hadn't since the day of the fire. Finally, as dawn was breaking, Mrs. Holloway emerged from the bedroom, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Wyatt," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You have a healthy daughter." Nathan's knees nearly buckled with relief. "And Grace, is she?" "Exhausted but fine," Mrs. Holloway assured him. "She's asking for you." He entered the bedroom tentatively, his eyes immediately finding Grace propped up against the pillows, her face pale and drawn but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in one of the handmade blankets from the baby shower. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the hours of labor, "come meet your daughter." He approached the bed as if in a dream, sitting carefully on the edge and peering at the tiny face nestled against Grace's breast. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and skin as pink and perfect as a rose petal. "She's beautiful," he breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to stroke his daughter's cheek. "Just like her mother," Grace smiled tiredly. "Elizabeth Margaret Wyatt, does that meet with your approval?" "It's perfect," Nathan assured her, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "You're perfect." "I love you so much, Grace." "I love you too," she replied, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. "Both of you." Little Elizabeth, called Ellie almost from the first day, thrived under her parents' devoted care. She had Grace's delicate features but Nathan's dark hair and expressive eyes, a perfect blend of them both. As she grew from infant to toddler, her personality emerged curious, determined, and loving, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. On warm afternoons, Grace would often take Ellie to visit the site where her original cabin had burned. The land had been reclaimed by nature, with wildflowers growing among the charred remains, but Grace wanted her daughter to know the story of how her parents had found each other. "You see, little one," she would say, holding Ellie on her hip, "this is where Mama's life changed forever. I thought it was the worst day, losing my home, but it turned out to be the best day, because that's when Papa came riding up on his horse like a hero from a storybook. Nathan occasionally joined them on these pilgrimages, standing with his arm around his wife as they contemplated the sight that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" he asked once. "Coming west, losing everything in the fire?" Grace looked up at him, then at their daughter playing with wildflowers nearby. "How could I regret the path that led me to you and Ellie? The fire took my possessions, Nathan, but it gave me a family and a love I never dreamed possible." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd taken a different route that day, or if I'd been just a few minutes later." "But you weren't," Grace reminded him, her hand finding his. "You were exactly where you needed to be when I needed you most." "Some might call that coincidence, but I call it destiny." As Ellie grew, so did the Wyatt ranch. Nathan's careful management and Grace's sharp business sense helped them expand their operations, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and increasing their herd. They hired additional hands to help with the work, built a larger barn, and became known throughout the territory for the quality of their stock. Their family grew as well. When Ellie was 3, Grace gave birth to a son, Michael, as they had planned, though everyone called him Mike. 2 years later, twin girls joined the family, Laura and Lily, completing their household with joyful chaos that neither Nathan nor Grace would have traded for all the peace and quiet in the world. Through it all, their love remained the bedrock of their existence. No matter how busy life became with 4 children and a thriving ranch, they made time for each other, quiet conversations after the children were asleep, occasional rides to Grace's cabin for a day or night alone together, small gestures of affection that kept the flame of their love burning bright. 15 years after the fire that brought them together, they celebrated their anniversary with a party attended by family, friends, and neighbors. The Wyatt children, now ranging from 14-year-old Ellie to 8-year-old twins, had arranged a special surprise. They had collected stories from everyone who remembered the day of the fire and Nathan's daring rescue, compiling them into a leather-bound book illustrated with Ellie's careful drawings. As Grace turned the pages, reading the accounts of that fateful day, tears filled her eyes. "I had no idea so many people remembered it so clearly," she said, looking up at the gathered faces. "To us, it was the beginning of our story, but I never realized how it touched others as well." "That's because true love is rare and precious," Mrs. Holloway said, now gray-haired but still sharp as ever. "When we witness it being born, especially in such dramatic circumstances, it stays with us." Later that night, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Nathan and Grace sat together on their porch swing, the book of memories in Grace's lap. 15 years, Nathan marveled, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I carried you from that burning cabin. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you my entire life," Grace replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "As if everything before was just preparing me for you." Nathan kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "Do you remember what you told Ellie about the fire being both the worst and best day of your life?" Grace nodded. "I still believe that. Why do you ask?" "Because I've been thinking about how often the things we fear most, loss, change, having to start over, turn out to be gateways to greater joy than we could have imagined." He took her hand, his thumb stroking over the wedding ring he'd placed there 15 years ago. "You lost your cabin that day, but we found each other, and every day since has been a gift I never take for granted." Grace turned her face up to his, the love of 15 years shining in her eyes. "I wouldn't change a moment of our journey, Nathan, not one moment." As the stars twinkled overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and sage across their land, Nathan Wyatt kissed his wife with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their love from the beginning. From the ashes of destruction had risen a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year, a love forged in fire, tested by time, and destined to burn brightly for all their days to come. And in the quiet of the night, with their children sleeping peacefully and their home standing strong against the wilderness, they renewed the promise they had made to each other beneath those same stars so many years before. To face whatever came together, to build a life of purpose and joy, and to grow old side by side, grateful for each day they were granted in each other's arms. For Grace and Nathan Wyatt, the fire that had once threatened to take everything had instead given them everything that truly mattered: a love as vast as the western sky, a family to cherish, and the certainty that even in life's darkest moments, hope and love could emerge, phoenix-like, from the flames.